A Minnesota state senator, one Justin Eichorn, whose recent legislative buffoonery involved trying to codify Trump derangement syndrome as a clinical illness, now stands accused of soliciting a minor for prostitution. You read that correctly. The man who would brand opponents of a certain orange demagogue as deranged has allegedly been caught pursuing a teenage girl, 17 according to police, in exchange for sexual favors. If that doesn't bring the hypocrisy of self-declared moralists into its starkest relief, I'm not sure what does. I have been told there is such a thing as poetic justice, but in cases like this it looks more like a stinging comeuppance. Eichorn's arrest demands a thorough exploration, not because we relish the downfall of a wretched hypocrite, though hypocrisy is indeed a high crime in any moral sense, but because it blows the lid off a long-standing phenomenon. Those who shout loudest about the unhinged state of other people's politics often harbour the most fetid private demons. We've witnessed it time and again. Here we have yet another champion of family values, or at least a self-appointed adjudicator of mental health, undone by an alleged taste for what is morally and legally repugnant. For those unacquainted with this fiasco, a swift recap will suffice. Eichorn, a Republican, is best known lately for touting a piece of legislation that would, in some idiotic Orwellian move, classify Trump derangement syndrome as a mental disorder. The phrase TDS was always a cudgel, an easy way for excitable right-wing pundits to smear anyone who criticized Trump as irrational, unstable, or certifiably insane. By that logic, if you objected to Trump's bigoted pronouncements, authoritarian posturing, or near-limitless capacity for mendacity, you weren't operating on reason or principle. You were simply deranged. Eichorn's comedic introduction of this claptrap into the Minnesota legislature should have been hooted off the stage on grounds of Philistinism alone. But now, it's all overshadowed by a far worse scandal. A man of 40 with a wife and 4 children at home has been arrested on suspicion of seeking sexual contact with a minor, someone just a hair's breadth away from childhood. The Bloomington police chief himself put it bluntly, noting that if you come to that city looking to exploit someone's child, you will be locked up. Yet Eichorn, a paternal figure of some repute, apparently thought the rules didn't apply to him. Arrest first, charges pending, shame immediate. He's now an emblem of everything foul about those in public office who cling to the moral high ground while sinking in their own scandalous bog. If I may speak frankly, as is my habit, the hypocrisy is even more pungent when one considers the entire premise of this Trump derangement syndrome crusade. It reveals that Eichorn, like many among the Trump cult, was attempting to formalize the notion that serious critics of the Donald are mentally imbalanced. At best, it's an infantile gag. At worst, it's yet another shrewd example of the rhetorical practice of turning the blame outward. Label your critics as mad, so your own sins remain out of view. And here, the day after Eichorn tries to brand the rest of the world as sick, he's arrested for behavior so vile that it leaps from the realm of moral turpitude straight into criminal degeneracy. If it's true, degenerate is hardly hyperbole. This might be dismissed as just one more salacious anecdote in the annals of American politics were it not so vividly representative of a larger sickness, a real one, not the imaginary TDS. We've seen it in moralizing televangelists, family values politicians, crusading culture warriors. They sermonize on virtues and brand dissenters as depraved, while they themselves indulge in the ugliest possible vices. The man who rails against gay marriage is found soliciting men in airport bathrooms. The bishop who decries secular feminism is discovered in a motel with his mistress. And now the senator who wants to classify your political frustration as insanity is allegedly scurrying into the dark corners of sex trafficking, preying on a minor. One can't help but think we've found the real derangement here. Meanwhile, Republican leaders and Democratic leaders alike are calling for Eichorn's resignation. Good. If we can't agree on anything else in these hyperpolarized times, perhaps we can manage unanimity on the proposition that any adult, let alone an elected official, caught seeking to buy a child's sexual compliance should be banished from the halls of legislation. The small irony is that his exit would slightly widen the advantage of the DFL, Minnesota's Democratic Farmer Labor Party, in the Senate, proof that this moral meltdown comes with a side of political realignment. There's no point lamenting that. If Republicans want to keep moral crusaders in their stable, they'd best be certain said crusaders aren't morally bankrupt. If you can spare a tear for the 4 children of Eichhorn's own household, do so. Their father's humiliating predicament is splashed across the headlines, and they are presumably left to make sense of it all. Let us remain mindful, too, that it is still an accusation. He's not formally convicted yet, but the phrase, "caught in the act," does carry weight. The police have made it clear they arranged a meeting in which Eichhorn expected to rendezvous with a 17-year-old. This is not some vague hush-hush scandal. An entire sting operation is spelled out in the public record. He was the one, apparently, who sought it. One has to squint to see how that might be an innocent misunderstanding. As for the rightful place of Trump derangement syndrome, the crowning absurdity is that Eichhorn wanted it enshrined in state law. Whatever cosmic entity dispenses irony clearly had a busy day. We're left with the image of a man so certain that anti-Trump sentiments are a sign of madness that he tried to brand them as an ailment, while apparently suffering from a moral black hole where one's conscience ought to be. One might propose that actual psychological screening needs to be done in the other direction. If your devotion to a political figure is so cult-like that you brand opposing views as deranged, perhaps that itself is a form of mania. That is the real story here. Not that a local politician fell from grace, though that's galling enough, but that the entire ethos of ridiculing Trump's critics rests on a shaky edifice of moral pretension. This is hardly the first time it's collapsed in stunning fashion. But Eichhorn's downfall is especially illustrative, because it's so stark and grotesque. "You're insane if you disagree with me," he all but said, "and in the meantime let me go indulge in something truly vile behind the scenes. Let's put it plainly. If you want to detect hypocrisy, follow the most loudly professed moral convictions. In politics, the stink never fails to lead you to some closet stuffed with skeletons. Today, that closet door has swung wide, and Senator Eichhorn stands blinking in the unflinching light. An alleged pedophile in the eyes of the law, and a moral reprobate in the eyes of anyone who believes children are not sexual commodities. Whether or not the senator is eventually found guilty by a court, the spectacle remains. The next time you hear a politician or any public figure talk about Trump derangement syndrome, feel free to wonder, what are they trying to distract us from? Because in at least this one unforgettable instance, the red herring of TDS was used to cloak something about as vile, criminal, and ruinous as could be. And while I generally preach caution when hurling words like evil, there's a case to be made that preying on the young is about as definitive a yardstick as we get. No doubt the senator might claim he was entrapped, or that there's some big misunderstanding. Thus is the usual script. But even if by some Kafkaesque contortion he eludes formal consequences, the moral verdict is likely irredeemable. And it's a verdict we should bear in mind whenever self-righteous blowhards push their new derangement label on political dissent. Now, if you'll pardon me, I'll leave Senator Eichhorn's colleagues to sift through the wreckage. Let them handle his resignation. Let them posture and huff about standards. In the end, the real standard was plain from the start. If you are going to legislate morality, or in this case pathologize your political adversaries, ensure your own moral house is in order. If not, you risk becoming the latest poster child for a deeper syndrome, a near-pathological hypocrisy that's haunted humankind since we first discovered how to wag our tongues in condemnation of others.